Okay, we want to continue. In this video, we want to talk about. I want to talk about introductions. Just a quick reminder of the 6 steps of sermon preparation. Last time I said the 5 steps, but the 6th step is the actual work on the introduction and the conclusion of the sermon. Um, just a quick review. The first step, of course, is to find and limit the text. And this class is done for you. If you choose Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 through 5, that is it. Chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. The text has been found and limited. If you pick Romans 12, verses 3 through 5, that is the text. So the first step is to find and limit the text. You only need enough text to communicate the thought. Then you study the text, study the background, the context, what is the passage talking about. And then the third step is to determine the topic and the outline of the text. State the exegetical idea. This is the subject plus the complement. And then the 5th step is to craft the homiletical idea, the preaching point from the actual exegetical idea. Then the preaching points will come from the actual outline. And then finally is the introduction and conclusion. So there's some of the basic types of sermon introductions. The first type is the basic type, the vanilla type. You read the verses. You start by reading the actual Bible verses, and then you mention the title, what are you going to talk about, and then you transition into your message. Modified basic type is to dramatically read the verses. When I say dramatically, that is to, the passion and the emotion that the original text had, you convey in your reading, and then you transition to the message. Then you have a build interest type 1. It's when you tell a related story, a story or illustration that's related to the text, and then you transition into the actual passage in the text. And then you have a build interest type 2. Instead of telling a story, you dramatically talk about the text. Not read, but just dramatically talk about the background of the text, and then you transition into the text and then to the points of the message. And then finally, you have what is called just an attention grab. You just tell an unrelated story, maybe have a humorous story or just an interest story, and then you read the text and transition into the message. So what I want to do is have you listen to 2 types of sermon introductions, one from Tony Evans and one from Haddon Robinson. And the 2 questions that I want to ask is, does the introduction grab your attention? And does it make you want to hear the rest of the sermon? And so I want to get started. I want to play the first sermon introduction from Dr. Tony Evans.
Good morning. It is a delight and an honor to be here again, to have the high privilege of ministry. Just a few months ago that I was here. Want to know how I got to be back so quickly? It's very simple. I called and asked, could I come back? Dr. Robinson told me he heard my messages a few months ago, and I heard what he just said just now, but that's not what he told me on the phone. He said, I heard you, and I didn't recognize anything in that you got from my class. So, I said, well, please, come on, Doctor, let me give me another chance. He said, practice. So I said, okay. Before you fill in your speakers for the week, just let me practice a little bit. So I did it. I sent him a tape. He listened to it and said, you're getting better. But you have to understand, this is a preaching weekend. We really need to have the creme de la creme. So I said, okay, give me one more chance. He said, okay, I'll give you one more chance. So I did practice more. Worked on my gestures, the whole thing. I sent him another tape. He said, I listened. You're definitely moving in the right direction. But this week, you're just not ready. please. I said, if you let me come, I'll come for free. He said, man, you're ready. So, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts upon them may be compared to a wise man who built his house upon the rock. The rains descended and the floods came. The winds blew and burst against that house. Yet it did not fall, for it had been founded upon the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine does not act upon them will be like a foolish man who built his house upon the sand. The rains descended and the floods came and the winds blew and burst against that house. And it fell. Great was its fall. These words conclude one of the greatest sermons ever preached. Matthew 7, verses 24 through 27, as Jesus Christ brings to a culmination the great Sermon on the Mountain. He does so with a poignant truth. A truth about two men. And I just simply want to look at these two men over the next few moments.
So that's his introduction to the sermon that he takes from Matthew chapter 7, verse 24, the end of the Sermon on the Mount. And that will fall into the category of intention grab. He begins with just talking about the setting that he was in at a preaching conference. And he just talks about that for a few minutes. And then he transitioned immediately into the text. He doesn't even tell anyone to turn to Matthew. He just starts reading it. Rather a dramatic reading of the actual text. And then he transitioned to his actual sermon. He compares the two men, the two at the end of that sermon when Jesus says, if the person listens to these words of mine, they're like a man who built his house on a rock. Whoever listens but does not do it is like a person that built their house on the sand. So he begins his sermon by outlining what he's going to talk about with a very good introduction. I would say it's a very good introduction. It makes me want to listen to the rest of the sermon. And so let's look at Haddon Robinson's intro. Go ahead and play that clip for you.
Have you ever wondered how Jesus spent his evenings and his nights? After those long, weary hours of ministry, have you ever wondered what Jesus did, where Jesus went? Some of his disciples came to him early on to ask him about the fringe benefits of discipleship. Jesus told them that the foxes had holes and the birds of the air had nests, but the Son of Man had no permanent place to put his head. So I gather that there were times in Jesus' life when he slept out in the field with the sky for a blanket and the stone for a pillow. But there were other times in Jesus' experience that he enjoyed the warmth and hospitality of good friends. There was probably no home in all of Israel more valuable to him than the home of Martha and Mary and their brother Lazarus in the village of Bethany. The closing hours of his life, when other hearts and homes were shut to him, the door of this house in Bethany was always open to him. In this passage that Grace read to you a few moments ago, Jesus and his disciples are on their way to the capital city for the last time. To get there, they have to go through the village of Bethany, a suburb of Jerusalem, about 2 miles to the east. And when Martha hears that the disciples and Jesus have hit town, she insists that they come to her home for dinner. She wants to extend warm hospitality, and she wants to show them through her hospitality how much she loves them. Now, it's always a bit of a threat, I think, for a woman to have a preacher in her home for dinner. To have 13 of them sitting in the living room is sort of an Olympic challenge. I've been married now just about 40 years, and I still am in awe of what the skilled cooks are able to do. A good cook can take the cold food, get it into the refrigerator at one time, the hot food in the stove at another time. It all comes out at the same time, and everybody has a good time. From where I sit out there in the living room, the whole thing seems like a kind of minor miracle to me. And as Martha was trying to pull off the miracle, it wasn't going very well. The stove was giving off more smoke than heat. The bread refused to rise. And pretty soon the whole thing smelled more like a burnt offering for Jesus than a dinner. And finally she looked around for her sister Mary to help her, and she glanced in the living room, and there was Mary sitting at Jesus' feet. And now, perturbed, she came back into the kitchen, and she was as burned up as the dinner. Then the volcano inside of her exploded, and she stormed into the living room and went up to Jesus and said, "Lord, don't you care that I have to get this meal by myself? Bid my sister come and help me." I'm sure she thought that Jesus would come to her defense and send Mary scurrying into the kitchen. But Jesus responds to Martha as a parent might respond to a fretting child. He says, Martha, one dish would have been enough. And Mary has chosen the good part, and it will not be taken away from her. Now, you don't have to go to seminary to understand that story. You don't have to take a course in hermeneutics to discover who gets the low marks and the high marks. And we all know that Martha made the bad choice and Mary made the good choice. That's just the way it is, and we all understand that. Difficulty is that after I've come to that conclusion, my head and heart just don't agree. I can confess to you that I have a secret sympathy with Martha.
And so that's Haddon Robinson's intro. Now his intro is different. He begins with just conversational tone, bringing you into the actual social setting and bringing the scripture alive, talking about, how Martha felt and gets you to see the actual text. He's actually telling you a story about the text that he's getting ready to preach from. And so he's bringing you into it and using just a common setting so you can get a feel for the actual story. And so that is a different way of introducing it. And so those are two examples of what sermon introductions look like. And so our next video, we're going to actually talk about some delivery discussion points. And so we'll end this discussion here.